Okay, class. This week we're going to focus on the third set of illusions. Like always, you have a set of note cards to do that are due on Friday. This week is a little short, so we won't see you on Wednesday due to the holiday. But we still are going to have a quiz on Friday. And remember that on the front of the note card goes your name and the name of the illusion. And on the back goes the definition of the illusion or the story of the illusion, and then a modern example. One thing I've noticed in the last couple sets of note cards is that people are not explaining their modern example. Don't just put a title or a person's name, but just say why that fits into the example. This week we're focusing just on biblical illusions, and the main theme we're going to focus on is this idea of biblical people. I did the numbers again so that you have them for the note cards. There will be 15 note cards this time, and the first 10 of them are all different people or different sets of people. So each line here is a note card. So even though there are two names for the first three, it still counts as one note card because they fit into the story together. Now the first group is Cain and Abel. They are the firstborn sons of Adam and Eve, and this is where the first murder occurs in the Bible, with the idea that Abel is doing well and is rewarded by God, and Cain gets jealous over this, and so he decides to murder his brother. And this is that idea of murdering your own family member because of jealousy and knowing how that fits in. The next one is David and Goliath. You see the picture here. The little boy here, or the young man, is David, and this is Goliath. Goliath is a giant, and David is known for slaying Goliath. So that idea of going after something larger than life, something larger than you, and being able to protect yourself. David also becomes a future king of the Israelites. He's the one that is with them while they're roaming the desert and stuff like that, but knowing the idea of overcoming such obstacles like this. The next one is Samson and Delilah. This is Samson. This is Delilah. The idea is that Samson is almost like this immortal man with this really long hair, and he's really strong and he's very heroic. But as soon as Delilah cuts his hair, he loses his strength. So it's that idea of, it's kind of like the Achilles heel when we look at Greek mythology, and Achilles' actual heel is his one weakness. Samson's weakness and the ability to take away his strength lies in cutting his hair. So that idea of taking away someone's weakness or taking away someone's strength and putting them through to a weakness is important. Noah, I think you guys all know Noah, especially with relation to the flood, and the idea that he built the ark, and the idea of sailing that for 40 days while the earth was flooded because God had given him instructions to build it. I know that you guys know that the ark landed on Mount Ararat in Armenia. Noah is actually going to show up in the Miller's Tale, so paying attention to that is important. Mary Magdalene is a prostitute from the Bible. She's known for washing Jesus's feet. And then she's also known for being the one to discover that Jesus's body was no longer in the tomb after he was crucified. So she's the first person to discover just the pieces of clothing that were there and not his body. Okay, going the wrong way. Okay, the next set of people, so this is people 6 through 10. Here, the first one we have is Jesus Christ, knowing the idea that he is a carpenter born to Mary and Joseph, that he lives about 30 years, the idea that he is the savior of the people and that he dies for their sins, and the idea of bringing religion to the masses and the people is important, and the idea that he is God's son as well. Lucifer is he's what we call an archangel. He is a brother of God, and they in a battle and in a war, he betrays God and he ends up being banished. And when he's banished, he's actually banished to hell, which we covered last week in Locations. So knowing the idea of Lucifer, Satan, the devil, they all fit into that idea. Knowing what he stands for, what's important there, but knowing more the biblical side, the idea of the fallen angel and being banished to hell and what he's supposed to be doing. Okay, Michael is another archangel. You know the archangel status from the levels of angels when we talked at the first set of biblical allusions. Michael in the book of Revelations, which is the last book of the New Testament of the Bible, is the head angel of God's army. He's the one that actually leads God's army into Judgment Day, or on the final apocalypse, or sorry, the final Armageddon, which we're going to look at in just a minute. And he actually is able to beat Lucifer's army in that idea of the end of times that happens in the book of Revelations. Now, the last two people, we've kind of touched on this idea of Judas Iscariot, but the last two people have to do with the crucifixion of Christ. Judas is the one who actually turned in Jesus. He's the one that made sure that he got arrested. So he's the idea of stabbing your best friend in the back because he was one of the 12 apostles. So he definitely fits in with that idea of stabbing a friend in the back. This also fits in with that idea of Julius Caesar being literally stabbed in the back by his two best friends. But I want a modern example of, it's what we would call treason. So it fits in with that aspect of one of the greatest sins. The next one we have is Pontius Pilate. If we actually look at this picture, this is a picture of Jesus on trial in front of Pontius Pilate, and Pontius Pilate is the Roman who actually sentences Jesus to be crucified. Okay, so knowing that not only is it Judas that turns him in, but it's Pontius Pilate that makes the final decision. And this is actually a picture of Michael. And you see the two armies on either side of him, and the huge wings go with that status of that idea of the archangel. Okay, so there are 5 things outside of the people that we're going to look at this week. The first one being the book of Revelations, which is the last book in the New Testament, like I had mentioned earlier when I had talked about Michael and Lucifer. Now, in the book of Revelations, this is basically spells out what the end of the earth is going to look like and what the end of times is going to look like. You need to know what the other name for the book of Revelations is, and you need to know what the final battle or the final war is called. So I would highly suggest that you look those two up and include them on your note card. But definitely people refer back to this idea of different things that are spelled out in the book of Revelations and trying to predict when the second coming of Christ will be and when the final battle will be between Lucifer and Michael. Okay, the plagues of Egypt come with the idea of Moses. These are the 10 plagues that God puts on the people of Egypt when Moses is trying to get out, to part the Red Sea, and to get out of Egypt and away and get freedom for the Israelites. You need to know what these 10 things are. We're going to do a little bit of stuff with them this week and trying to help with that, but that idea of people refer to the plagues all the time, especially the idea of the locusts, and the idea of hail and fire, the idea of the death of the firstborn son, and the idea of water turns to blood. Those ones show up more than the rest do with the idea of trying to predict that end of the world and thinking that the plagues of Egypt are involved. How I suggest you do this note card is much like you did the levels of the angels, is that you list all 10, and then you pick 1 or 2 of them and talk about how they apply to modern times. Okay? The next thing we have is the idea of the crucifixion. Specifically, what I want to focus on with the crucifixion, though, is the crown of thorns. So you see it here in two pictures. You see the actual crown of thorns around Jesus' head, and you see the actual, or an actual crown and what it looks like. This is not an easy thing to put on someone's head. It's pre-made like this, and then they put it on, but they have to force it on. So the thorns are actually going into the person's head, so it's almost like a form of torture. But you need to look up what the actual crown of thorns stands for and symbolizes, and then you need to find a modern example of it. Okay, the last two are the two Bible stories for this time. We've done Bible stories before with the idea of like Jonah and the whale. The two we have this time are the Good Samaritan and the prodigal son. The Good Samaritan is a person who, and you can find plenty examples of both of these in modern times, but the Good Samaritan is the idea that someone was, if you look at the picture here, thirsty and basically dying on the side of the road, and people were walking by and not helping. But one person decided to be the Good Samaritan and stop and help, and not wanting reward or anything for it, but that idea of the innocent person stopping to help someone else in need, with no need for anything else from them. But that idea of stopping to help because it's the right thing to do. So that moral lesson in there. Okay, the prodigal son is this idea that this father had two sons. One of them decided, and he was the younger son, one of them asked his father for his inheritance early and said he was going to take it and move to the city. Well, while he was in the city, he gambled it all away. He spent it on prostitutes. He bought food. And eventually he comes home downtrodden and penniless, and asks his father if he could be his servant because he knows that he's unworthy since he spent his inheritance in an inappropriate way. And the father says, no, no, you're my son. You can stay here. You can be my son. I forgive you for what you have done. But it's that idea of asking for forgiveness and forgiving others. Prodigal actually means wasteful, so it's the story of the wasteful son, and it's more about the idea of the forgiveness that goes along with it, and how that plays into the role. Knowing the older son's reaction is important to the story, and how he feels about his younger brother returning and the dad forgiving him and throwing him a big party. I know if I was the older son, I probably wouldn't be happy about that considering what he'd just done to his inheritance. But knowing how the story ends is important. I will see you in class on Tuesday. Make sure that you start on the note cards and the research. This week there are only 15, but like previous weeks, I highly suggest that you flip through your other Allusion note cards so that you have an idea, because one or two of them might show up again on this quiz on Friday. Talk to you later and see you tomorrow.